Thank you for joining us again tonight. We're pursuing on in Genesis chapter 14 in the life of Abraham. Abraham and Lot have now separated. Lot has moved down and pitched his tent in Gomorrah. He's down there with all the evilness and wickedness that's going on. And now we kind of sidestep a little bit, and the Bible starts showing some of the background of what's going on in chapter 14. And this is the description of the first war that the Bible records in Genesis 14. It is also challenging to read chapter 14 because we start seeing the names of a lot of people that are about this long. That's hard to pronounce. So I hopefully will not butcher some of these names in Genesis 14. But let me set the stage here. These times were basically lawless times. It was whoever was in charge set the laws and set the rules. And so people started coming together for protection and building cities and staying in cities and building up the walls of cities for protection, because the way people got wealth back then is they would either steal it or they would come by and just take whatever they wanted. So people wanted to have protection. There was no laws. And so these cities that were built up in Mesopotamia, in Palestine, and around the Red Sea would spring up. Each one of those cities would have its own set of government, set of laws, often its own language, and they would have a king that would rule and protect the people. People would pay taxes of their wealth in order for protection from the marauders that were coming around. Occasionally there would be wars where people would get together, and suddenly there would be a confederacy of people that were protecting or extorting other cities for money to keep them from attacking them. Kind of like North Korea has extorted the world a lot, trying to threaten the world, but they would give them money to keep them at bay. Now in Genesis 14, we'll read about these four kings. Now these four kings were not living or didn't have their city set up right around the Dead Sea, but they were actually over beyond where Abraham came from in the Ur of the Chaldees. They were way over near the Persian Gulf. And it says, "And came to pass in chapter 14 that in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer," that's a good one, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. These four kings basically had formed a confederacy, and they were extorting money for protection from the other cities in order to keep peace. And these four kings that were doing that, these 12 cities, including Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around there below the Dead Sea, they were sending them tribute money every year for 12 years. And then in the 13th year, they said, "We're not going to send them any more money." Well, in the 14th year, here come the kings for their stuff. And they started over around the Persian Gulf, and they basically retraced the steps of Abraham, and they took whatever they want along that journey, some 500, 600 miles, until they came down into the Dead Sea, and there they started war with Sodom and Gomorrah. And the 5 kings of those cities around Sodom and Gomorrah came out to challenge these 4 kings and their army. And they were there in the valley of Siddim, which is just south of the Dead Sea. And down there were tar pits, and they call them slime pits in the Bible, but they were tar pits. And the area, you wouldn't be able to see them because it'd be covered with dust or dirt from the region, but when you stepped on it, it was like quicksand, and you would fall in and be consumed by these tar pits. Well, when you think about the lifestyle of Sodom and Gomorrah, how decadent, how wicked they were, how they were all self-indulgent on themselves and satisfying their own lustful desires, with homosexuality and all kinds of sexual perversion, you can imagine that they were not very good warriors against these warriors that were professional soldiers that were coming against them. So when the 5 kings around Sodom and Gomorrah and those kings came out to meet these 4, it didn't take long for these 4 kings to get those 5 kings and their soldiers running for their lives. And many of them fell into the tar pits, and they should have known the area. But they fell in their own traps, and many of them ran up into the woods and into the hills to hide from these armies. And after they had conquered everything, then there was one that escaped and came to Abraham the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre. And there he told them what had occurred, because Lot and his family were captured and taken as slaves. Sodom and Gomorrah had been completely pillaged, and all the value of all those regions and all those cities was being consumed by this marauding army that was now just going throughout the region, taking whatever they want, including the nephew of Abraham, Lot. Now, when I look at this, I try to ask myself, what's God trying to tell me? He's trying to tell me here Abraham, who is now very wealthy, doesn't have a city to protect him, doesn't have a soldier or armies to protect him. It's just Abraham and a group of men that he has gathered over time. But yet God himself is there to protect Abraham.